Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Beyond the Crucible. I'm Gary Schneeberger, the co-host of the show and the communications director for Crucible Leadership. And you have clicked play on, we hope you've clicked subscribe to, or you will click subscribe to after you're done listening, to a podcast that deals in what we call crucible experiences, crucible moments. They are things that we all probably know a little better than we wish we did. They are the traumas, tragedies, failures, setbacks in life, those things that knock the wind out of your sails, those things that change the trajectory of your life, to be very accurate and honest about it. And they can be extraordinarily hurtful. But here's the good news. We talk about them here on the show, not so we can swap war stories about them or so we can wallow in them. We talk about them here to offer hope and healing, to get beyond them, as the title of the show says. And as we have another conversation today about that, with me, I shouldn't say with me, I'm with him because he's the founder of Crucible Leadership. I'm just the co-host guy. He's the founder of Crucible Leadership. He is Warwick Fairfax. Welcome, Warwick.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Gary, and very much looking forward to it.
And we have an impressive guest today. It's always fun to read the biographies of guests before you read them on the air, and I'm going to do that in just a second, because you just like, wow, this person's done a whole lot of impressive stuff. So I'm going to tell you, listener, about Kaley Klemp. And these are some of the impressive things that Kaley has done. She is a sought-after speaker, YPO and executive team facilitator, and transformational executive coach. She advises senior executives on how to uncover and address core challenges in communication, trust, and culture. Kaley is an Enneagram personality model specialist, helping organizations outperform their competitors by unlocking a deeper understanding of what motivates and drives people. Kaley co-authored The Drama-Free Office. Wouldn't we all love to have those all the time? And she also co-authored The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. And she wrote 13 guidelines for effective teams. We also would all love to have effective teams at all times. Her new book, which she co-authored with her husband, The 80-80 Marriage, a new model for a happier, stronger relationship, is going to be published by Penguin Random House on February 9th of 2021. If all goes as we plan at Beyond the Crucible, that will be the day that you hear this episode, February 9th, 2021. In her TEDx talk, she encourages leaders to stop trying to change and encourages growth in all areas where she works. Kaley, welcome. Warwick, take it away.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty inspiring stuff. Working with teams, marriage, just all of the things that you do. And I'm fascinated to get into the 80-80 marriage concept. It sounds, I love some of the concepts you talk about. It's generosity and shared success, not so much fairness. But before we get into that, I'd love to hear a little bit about Kaley and maybe how where you grew up and your family, just a bit about kind of the background of who is Kaley Klemp and what makes you you, so to speak.
Oh, I love that question. Well, thank you, Gary. Thank you, Warwick. I'm so delighted to be here. So I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, which happens to be where I live now. And, little girl, one of the things that I think is kind of neat about my past is that my parents decided when I was in kindergarten that I would be in the bilingual class in my elementary school. And so I'm not sure if you know much about Boulder, Colorado. It is not well known for its diversity. And yet I got to be in class from kindergarten through sixth grade, where for that entire period of time, I think I was the only girl in my class who spoke English at home. And so there's just, it's a neat place to start to develop perspective and empathy. And I have to think that some of that fueled my desire to understand people even more that shows up in my life today. So I'm the oldest of three kids. We got a brother and a sister. My folks are still right here in Boulder. I'm really lucky that my family is awesome.
Well, I think you were telling me earlier that Nate's parents are also from Boulder, and I think you said what, all your family is pretty much within 45 minutes, or at least your parents and Nate's parents, and you have a daughter. I mean, that's, I'm assuming you probably get on reasonably well with them all. I mean, it could be a blessing or not. So.
Thankfully, we don't live under one roof. I think that would be too close.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's been work. It's such a gift that if I think about it through the lens of my 9-year-old, it really is a village that's helping to raise her. So today, actually, she is with my parents up skiing in the mountains. So, there's something really magical about, I think my in-laws are phenomenal. I'm one of the just luckiest people in the world, but, all of the mother-in-law stories don't apply for me. She's actually wonderful. And I didn't grow up near my grandparents. My parents were both from Michigan, and my grandparents, when I was little, I was in Colorado, they were in Michigan and in Florida. And seeing my daughter's closeness with her grandparents, I wouldn't trade lives with anybody except maybe her.
Well, I mean, that is so neat. I mean, my, parents are no longer living, but they were in Australia, and I've lived here since the early 90s. And my wife's parents were from Ohio, so we saw them and then spent part of the year in Florida. So we saw them quite a lot. But yeah, I think people don't appreciate it. A little bit off track here, but life in Australia is very different than here, because Australia is the same size geographically as the United States, but there's not that many people, not a whole lot in the middle. So if you're from Sydney, which I am, pretty much, all of your friends, they'll go to university, Sydney University, University of New South Wales. So I have an older sister that has 4 daughters, and they kind of all live pretty near. Now, if you're like more than 20 minutes, you're like, oh my gosh, the other side of the Harbour Bridge, you're like forever. So I realize in Australia, being near family is not that uncommon, because you're from Sydney. Why would you go somewhere else? Yeah, nothing against Melbourne, but you just get used to Sydney. So in America, it's very different. People are everywhere, like obviously your experience in Michigan. So it sounds like you had pretty good upbringing, and I think I saw some of the TEDx talk when you were a little girl, and the whole peanut butter and jelly shoelace thing. It's so neat. I guess maybe some perfectionist tendency. I think it's probably the story, but it was a good point there. It was a fun image and fun story. So
I appreciate you watching. Yeah, indeed, I was some perfectionist tendencies for sure, and a bit of a precocious little girl to scold my mother on her sandwich making skills.
So before we get into 80/80 marriage, what kind of led you on the path that you're on? Because you just have a passion for leadership and helping leaders think maybe more holistically, from everything from values inventory to Enneagram mindset. What was there something about your upbringing or family? What led you on the journey that you're on? What's sort of the origin story, if you will, of
that's a great question.
Do what you do.
Well, so I can actually trace it to a moment. So my dad, when I was growing up, he was an entrepreneur and ran a software company. Once upon a time when computers took up, entire rooms rather than in our pockets. He laughs now about, like, I remember having to program in the middle of the night because it was the only time it was cool enough where the computer wouldn't overheat. So totally different world. But he was part of an organization called YPO, our Young Presidents Organization. And when he sold his company, he was asked to come facilitate some events. And in 1999, he asked me, I was at university. So he said, hey, do you want to come see what I'm up to? Do you want to come participate in this event that I'm facilitating? I said, sure. I mean, how interesting could it be? So went to the event, and that was the moment in 1999 where I absolutely fell in love with this tool set and knew that I wanted to be committed to it. So, and really specifically what it was is that through that experience, I saw people see themselves more clearly, see some of the patterns and the choices that they had been making in their lives more clearly. And that facilitated a path for them to actually make different choices and to do things differently in their lives going forward. So, as you saw in the TED Talk, I don't think that should get us very far, but I actually think deep self-understanding and making choices can. And seeing that happen for person after person, I was hooked. It's like, okay, I want to do that.
So there's something about just helping people understand who they are. I mean, I think people can intellectually realize that that's important, but somehow that particular vision resonated very deeply to you, because somebody could have said, "Oh, that's neat, but okay, that's important." But why did you feel like that was for you? Why did that like tug at your heartstrings, or why did that piece of music, if you will, really feel like this really fits who I am and what I believe in?
Gosh, that's an excellent question. I think it was mostly about having people, to your point, it was that they saw themselves more clearly, but I think they also were able then to see the ways that they were creating, I'm going to call it suffering. And there are different flavors of that. You know, certainly very acute, dramatic, and also sort of more subtle, almost like a rock in your shoe kind of suffering. But in seeing that, they could realize what some of the things they had been doing were costing them. And that, to me, I think what tugged at my heartstring was recognizing this was a way that I could participate in people making their own lives better. And then I think about, and gosh, against this backdrop of COVID, where there's so much about contagiousness, the idea of if I can help people be contagious for good in their own lives and in the companies that they're leading, in the teams that they're on, in the families that they're members of, that I think really pulled at my heart.
Right, because I think probably a bit like you, I mean, good leadership can make such a difference. I mean, I have 3 kids, they're in their 20s, and, you know, I've done my fair share of helping them prep for interviews, and somewhat good at that, got a lot of practice, and throw out all these questions, you know, well, why do you want this job? And what about you really fits here? And, you know, what are your strengths? And then the awful question is, what are your weaknesses? Yeah, how do you answer that and still be positive? So, but yet be honest. So.
Exactly. And have it not feel like the person on the other side is like, that's not a real weakness. Thanks for trying.
Yeah, like when I applied to Harvard Business School, you know, you don't want to sort of write, well, I'm a bit of a workaholic and I'm so dedicated to studying that I just, all of my, you know, other life goes by the wayside. It's just so trite. But yeah, I mean, it's what I tell them is assume that most bosses you'll work for won't be good. You know, they might be really good, but it's not like 90% of bosses are, you know, clued in, empathetic, strong leaders, but yet listen, it's just, don't assume that's normal, because it's just not. It's like typically with if you have an issue in performance, the time you find out is when the pink slip happens and you're fired. And it's like, well, I just don't like giving negative feedback, and it just makes me feel uncomfortable. So I feel better if I just ask you to leave. That way we don't, it's easier for me.
It's so funny. I was actually having this conversation this morning with somebody who runs people and talent. And the conversation that we were in is the imperative of early and direct feedback, for exactly the reason that you're saying, that if you give constructive feedback early, then people know what to work on. They know where they stand. There's clear expectations, and there aren't surprises later on. But the piece that we were talking about that's really interesting that I think you're alluding to is the hidden cost of trust when there isn't that conversation. Because then people who they think they're doing well because they also aren't receiving feedback start to have that worry in the back of their mind, you know, is that pink slip coming for me? And so there's sort of a distrust of absence of feedback or too much positive feedback if there isn't sort of the balance of constructive feedback.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously in the family business I grew up in, which listeners know was a large, you know, 150-year-old family media business. There were times, especially when it was founded, where it was run very well. The John Fairfax, my great-great-grandfather, he was, everything you know, it would have been, I don't know if he did the 80-80 marriage, but he had a wonderful marriage, wonderful, great relationship with his kids, an elder at his church, his employees loved him, and he grew a very successful business. I mean, it's really, everything was in balance. But there were days in more recent past when it wasn't really so well run. But, you know, I can think of one kind of episode that really illustrates perhaps good leadership. Some of the things you'd probably advocate is years ago, before I went to Oxford, I had like an internship at J. Walter Thompson, which was a big advertising agency back in the day, about 4 or 5 ad agency mergers ago. And there was a guy out from Canada who was running, the Australian operation. And he made a point at these all-hands meeting of praising people. Now, it so happened that local agency had, the local Kellogg's account. And so they said, I've been chatting to the J. Walter Thompson folks back in the U.S. and North America, and they said that the work that you've done here on Kellogg's Australia is some of the best work that Kellogg's has seen worldwide in J. Walter Thompson. So he said that to the team, and I thought, boy, that's good leadership. He's praising them specifically amidst their peers who also worked there. So that sounds like a normal thing to do, but that's not normal. That kind of specific praise. One of the things I say, one of my little adages, is when it comes to praise, if you see something, say something.
Absolutely.
And be specific and
Yes.
encourage. It's one of my highest values. So, but anyway, that's all.
I think that the specificity is one of the things that so often also gets lost, right? Sort of the generic email that says, hey team, good job. I mean, it means a little something, but very quickly finds its way to the delete folder. Whereas the specificity of the recognition, who said it, to whom, I think to your point, has it stick and feel really more significant and true.
Absolutely. So before we get to 80 marriage, I know, speaking of origin stories, from what I understand, there was a bit of an origin story, like 2007 was not a good year. I know I'm reminded of Queen Elizabeth, who she had a year, she called her Annus Horribilis, a horrible year in which Windsor Castle almost burnt down, and it was a pretty tough year for her. So pretty remarkable woman. Was she like 95 and still riding horses? I mean, it's unbelievable. I think her husband's like 97, and I think they've tried to discourage him from driving as much as before, because he's had a couple of accidents. But look, we all would over 95. But so talk about 2007 and why that was such a tough year, and how that was sort of part of the backstory of how 80 marriage and the book came from.
Yeah, it's a hard story in some respects, because as you were saying, Gary, when we started the show, it's not necessarily fun to go back and relive. We refer to them as the dark years.
Right.
So the backstory of 2007 is that, so I'm originally from Colorado. I went to school in California, sort of more of a West Coast mountain past, and moved out to New Jersey to be with my brand new husband. And people would ask, oh, you're newlyweds, how's the extended honeymoon? And that was not our experience. So what had happened is my younger sister, at that time was 20, was a student in Boston and was a pedestrian hit by a drunk driver. And so she was in the hospital. She was in a coma, experienced quite a physical injuries, spent some time in a wheelchair, traumatic brain injury. And that was sort of the beginning of this year of our marriage. Right on the heels of that, literally weeks later, my husband and I tangled our handlebars on a bike ride. And as we fell, he fell harder and also hit his head. And so there was sort of this dual experience of traumatic brain injuries and not having a community. I was not near family and I didn't have my people. I was brand new. There wasn't even a friend network to go to. And so in that space, my husband and I ended up we just hooked each other's sort of negative thinking patterns. And instead of moving closer together in that crucible, there was a moment where we really started to move apart. And there was a conversation where both of us said to each other, you aren't the person that I married. I'm not sure what's happening here, but this isn't going to work. So there was very much a moment where we weren't sure we were going to make it as a couple. And so as I fast forward to, 2 springs ago out on a hike, which now we do date nights also, but really we're most committed to date hikes.
Yeah.
There was that backdrop, and looking back and wondering, really the catalyst of this book, The 80/80 Marriage, is about the context of modern marriage and looking at, hey, now against this backdrop where we're with our partners, we want things to be fair, we treat each other as equals, and oh my goodness, the list of things that we are trying to accomplish in a day, a week, a month really is quite extensive. How do you do that and stay connected and in love? We often would refer back to 2007 and say, what do we wish we had known then? How do we wish we had been able to establish our mindset? Gosh, if we could go give advice to ourselves back in 2007, who knows how stubborn we would have been and whether or not we would have taken good advice. But where do we wish we had laid a different foundation? And now when I work with leaders and with couples, and based on the 100 interviews that we did with couples, to say, what are the tools and what are the practices that help those really work?
Can I go back to 2007, and because I want to get one little slice of emotion from you, in that you and your husband at that time professionally were making it work. You were in a professional context working with leaders. You were thought leaders.
Yes.
And you came to a point where you realized, I think, you tell me if this is what happened, but you were thought leaders who realized that maybe you were practice strugglers. What did that feel like as you're advising people, here's the proper way to navigate work relationships, you're having trouble navigating your marriage relationship? What kind of dissonance did that cause for you emotionally?
That's a great question, Gary. If I were going to look back and analyze what I was doing at that point in time, I was using work as a way to escape from how hard things were in my personal life. And so in some ways, I think I was able to compartmentalize and say, hey, professional relationships are different from intimate relationships. And out of one side of my mouth, I think I might still say that's true, but I think they are actually much more closely connected than I would have given them credit for. I think the dissonance, to your point, was happening from the perspective of saying, like, I can't do this. And sort of the facing into the struggle and the sadness, and then not having sort of the cover story of, I don't know about you, but you can sort of sit on a podcast or, on a Zoom or give a talk and sort of, here's the shiniest, most palatable version of myself, right, to then sort of turn off the camera and really cry quite hard.
I mean, it's interesting that you were both successful. Obviously, you've got a whole consulting, coaching career. You mentioned, your husband is he a sort of academic consultant? He's pretty successful in his own right.
Yeah, at that point in time, he was getting his PhD. So we both we met at Boulder High, which I think is such a cute part of our story. We were chemistry lab partners. I will save you all of the puns. And then both went off to Stanford, and then I stayed in California when he went to New Jersey. So he was getting his PhD at Princeton. But to your point, winning teaching awards, publishing his dissertation, doing research, to then be a professor at Pepperdine, where many, many students were looking up to him, in the same way that leaders would sort of look to me. And so there is a moment too, like, are we taking our own advice? And what advice do we have to take?
Well, it is interesting, sort of the old joke when you maybe chatting to, I don't know, some support folks, like, for instance, if you have an Apple computer and you have an issue, the support teams are so incredible. They're so helpful. But you wonder if they get off the phone. And you could be talking to them for an hour about something so stupidly simple and says, that's okay. No, that's fine. I can help you with the next step. And they get off the phone with their significant other and probably zero patience and maybe start yelling. And, and it's like, okay, so you seem to be so good professionally, so calm, so patient. And then when it comes to family, where is that person? Where did they go? Is it kind of captured by aliens? I mean, what is the deal here? It's probably something that you find, right? That not only other people, but did you find that you and your husband professionally, how you dealt with people was very different than how you dealt internally?
Gosh, I'm thinking about my 9-year-old daughter, who she will come home from school and sort of have a fit or be upset or, no manners. I'm like, I don't understand. Your teacher says you're so good. And she said to me once, she was like, Mom, I used up all my good behavior at school. And so
sounds like you could identify with that a bit, huh?
yes, and so that's sort of the story that I'm thinking about, where I think there can be a moment where it's, sort of, I used up all my patience, or I used up all my good behavior, or I used up all my good questions. And I think there's a bit of, I'm going to call it like a reprioritization, where in recognizing, and I think about this a lot in present day, is who are my most important relationships, and am I treating them as such? Or am I, using up all my good behavior with strangers and giving my most precious relationships, my husband, my daughter, my family, my dearest friends, sort of the dregs? And if that's the case, how can I adjust where I'm spending my time and energy so that I'm nurturing those that I would say are most important?
It's funny how often we devote so much time to professional lives. Obviously, you want to look and act professional, be understanding, because if you don't, it's not good for your career. Nobody wants to work for somebody that's just, rants, raves, impatient. It's not a good way to, get promoted or to get business. And so it's like, okay, that's an obvious, that's going to hurt my career paycheck. I can't do that. At home, it's not the same, but I know you do a lot of things like 360 feedbacks, Enneagram, values inventory. Do you ever kind of laughingly say, gee, I wonder if I did a personal values inventory about what's important to me? Like, I don't do as much executive coaching with, I've got a book coming out next year and do a bunch of other things. But one of the things that I would sometimes ask clients, tell me about your values. And then to what degree do you think that you're living your values? And then I would say with a straight face, if they say, well, I'm not really living that. Okay, so
right.
Would you prefer to kind of change your values or change what you're doing? And I would say with a straight face, because as a coach, it's the client's choice. If they want to change their values, who am I to judge? Somebody else, some other human being. And I actually, as a coach, really believe in not judging other people's paths. Everybody has their own journey. Well, 99.9% of sane people aren't going to say, I'm going to change my values. Okay, well then, it's just so many people they're going so fast, they're not thinking, I actually may not be living my values. So if you probably wrote a values set, I'm guessing family wouldn't be like, I don't know, value number 80, I'm guessing.
Right, exactly.
It's probably up there somewhere. So if you did a values inventory, then compared how much is Kaley living some of those, I'm not picking on you, all of us would be in that. You'd be like, I teach this stuff. I have a values inventory.
Yeah.
Hundreds, if not thousands, have gone through it, and then, okay,
Yes.
You probably had that moment, right?
Oh my goodness, for sure. And I think you pointed to it. There's sort of the cobbler whose children have no shoes. There's sort of in doing the work with and for other people, there can be sort of a forgetfulness around doing the work for yourself. And in some ways, this is a really beautiful bridge to 80/80, that we start with the mindset of radical generosity. So instead of 50/50 fairness, right, to stretch to 80/80 to radical generosity. But what you're describing is one of the foundational principles of shared success. And first is really, do you know your own values? And then have you had the conversation with your partner to ensure that those values align? So to your point, we actually now have a chalkboard in our kitchen for that family where we put our values, and we'll have conversations often, sort of on our hikes, where we'll ask, hey, are we living in alignment with these? Are we choosing love, or are we choosing something else? Are we choosing impact, or are we choosing something else? And if we're choosing something else, to your point, is there a different value that now is superseding the ones we have, or is there an adjustment that needs to take place in our lives? And what I've found and what we've found is that knowing those values lets you set clearer priorities, and that informs your boundaries, where you can say yes and no to things with a much clearer conscience, because it's rooted in love is a value of ours. Like that quality of relationship, which shows up, with my daughter, with my husband, with my family, that's important. And if I'm not living that, gosh, I need to make different choices.
I think what you're saying is so important. I think it was Socrates said something like, unexamined life is not worth living. Well,
Yes.
you've got to know yourself, but you've also got to know, your partner, the person that you're, in your case, married to, and what you collectively think is important. And so many people, they're so busy with to-do lists. And, if you have young kids, I got to take my kid to soccer, ballet, whatever it is. And it's who's doing what and where, and I got to work late. And it's, you have conversations on to-do lists rather than who are we, what are we about? And so talk about this, because I'm fascinated with, everybody talks about fairness, 50-50. How do you split things up? And so this whole idea of, radical generosity, and so talk about the old paradigm and the new paradigm. What's the difference between the typical, it's all got to be 50-50, split it down the middle, which, okay, so it's hard to argue against fairness.
Right.
It doesn't sound like such a terrible concept, but talk about how what you're advocating is radically different.
Yeah. Well, so if fairness worked, I would say we should keep it. The trouble is that it doesn't actually work. And it takes me to, in our interviews, there was this brilliant story where a couple was talking about their relationships with their parents. And they were saying, so we did Father's Day with your family, and so we're going to do Mother's Day with my family. Well, for your family, we left on Friday and came back on Sunday. So for my family, we should leave on Friday and come back on Sunday. And it was hilarious because what they were talking about, when they actually unpacked it, both of them said, neither of us want to go for the same duration. We only want to go, Saturday for lunch. And yet, because we had to make it fair, there was all sorts of kind of horse trading around things that they didn't actually even want. So one way it doesn't work is because you end up advocating for things that you don't really even desire. And the second reason it doesn't work is it's actually a psychological principle, which is called availability bias. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but the idea is I know everything that I do in service of our relationship. So I know, every soccer practice that I drop off at. I know every, thank you card that I write. And I also know every invisible hour that I spend thinking about Thanksgiving dinner and who's gluten-free and what we should serve and how to arrange it so that it's COVID safe, et cetera, et cetera. My partner doesn't know most of those things, and I don't know most of the things that they're up to. Some things I can see where I watch him sort of, drive the trash cans down the driveway to, have the trash go out. But I miss, hey, did he have to have a conversation to, fix something that happened in our finances, or, who's waiting for the cable guy, right? There's so much that's invisible that fairness ends up being where I completely overestimate the things that I'm doing and underestimate the things that you're doing. And so we can never even get to an accurate picture to strive for fairness. Well,
that is so well said. And some of it too, there'll be, things that each person is good at and not good at. Like in my case, I married an American girl who I met in Australia. We've been married actually a little over 30 years, and very blessed. And she's very creative. She's an interior designer by profession, and she's just, we have a wonderful home. She's an incredible cook. I'm not, So if we did 50-50 fairness about cooking,
right,
the family would suffer.
Yes.
That wouldn't be so. Now, obviously, happy to wash dishes and all that, and take the lead on that. My kids are in their 20s, so obviously they're at an age where they actually can't help with that. But she's creative, so she really doesn't like numbers. That's not right or wrong. It's how she's wired. So she's happy for me to do the finances, and because I'm from Australia, it can be a little bit complicated between Australian stuff and U.S. stuff, and it gets a tad complex. But when it comes to major decisions, whoever's taking the lead will make sure the other person's informed and you're on the same page. But it's we've sort of come to a rhythm where, we both do what we're good at and interested in. And if something needs to be fixed, I'm pretty detail orientated. So I'm kind of like the secretary, basically, which I'm happy to be my wife's secretary. I mean, I have no problem with that. So, or I can need to call this contractor or this and arrange this. Got it. I'll make it happen. And so it happens.
Yes.
So I don't know. I mean, it's more just making sure each person does what they can contribute. So I don't know, does that make sense or fit at all? Kind of.
Yeah. Well, so I think you're saying two things that are really connected. So one is about you would miss out on joy if you tried to make it totally fair to the point of she enjoys cooking, right? To say, not only would the family suffer, I'm not because we're cooking too much, but there's a space where she enjoys it. So trying to make it fair actually is a net negative. I think the other thing that you're speaking to, though, is intentional roles. That one of the things that we found, especially in our interviews, is that people will end up doing things sort of just because they do. And we fondly refer to it as the wing it approach. It stands out. There was one couple we were talking with, and I thought it was so funny, where the dad was saying, I don't know exactly how this happened, but I'm the toothbrush guy. Like, there was no conversation about it, but if he's not there, the children don't brush their teeth. He's like, there's something very strange about this. Right? But there's a way that you and your wife, it sounds like, have made really wise choices where you say, I'm going to take sort of the more detail-oriented things. I'm going to take sort of more of the financial piece. And she says, I'm going to take the creative or the design or the, cooking piece. But you both know, so there's not toe stepping, nor is there resentment where she's like, how come I'm not doing it? And you're like, you're also not saying, how come you're not balancing this account?
Right. No, I mean, it's true. I mean, I don't know where it fits, but because I'm no expert on marriage or whatever, but certainly other concepts that, words like acceptance and forgiveness, like, for instance, I grew up in a very wealthy background. So, I'm not like Mr. Fix-It. Yes, I can assemble an IKEA piece of furniture, but if you want me to,
than I am.
If you want me to build a deck, no, I'm not the build the deck guy.
It's funny. I did not grow up in a very wealthy background, and I can't do that stuff either. I can hammer a nail in the wall, but that's about it.
So it's not just me. Okay, it's good to know.
We're all in good company here.
There you go.
But I guess my point is, my wife's dad, it was an oral surgeon, and did fine and all that, but he was Mr. Fix-It. Yeah. So it's like, well, my dad can do this and this. Why do we have to call someone? Well, fortunately, we had the means to do that, but it's like, I don't have any interest in that, nor am I good at it. And so, we each, had some things in which we had to accept about the other. And then when we make mistakes, kind of, obviously I'm a big believer in forgive and communication. I'm sort of hyper vigilant about communication. I'm often accused of over communicating. It's like, if I think there's a 1% chance there's an issue, let's make sure there's not. I'm very vigilant that way. But so acceptance, forgiveness, where does that fit into the 80-80 concept? Because obviously these are not new concepts, but yeah. What's your thought about all that?
I think that would fit in the mindset pillar, right? So if we think about sort of mindset and structure as being the two pillars, that in this mindset of radical generosity, there's in some ways sort of three mutually reinforcing positive things. So one is this idea of contribution. So I want to show up giving my best. But I think what you're describing is wearing the glasses of appreciation rather than those of criticism. That as you're contributing the gifts to us and the family, I notice those, I speak to those, I recognize those, I appreciate you for them, rather than wearing my glasses always of deficiency, where how come you can't fix that, or how come your cooking isn't great, or whatever it might be. That as we are giving to the relationship from a spirit of radical generosity, as we're seeing our partners through those glasses of appreciation, so also seeing them through radical generosity. And then there's clearing, which is really when something happens, because we're human, we make mistakes, we'll say things that are off, to reveal that inner experience. Hey, when you said that, I felt embarrassed and to make a request about it. My request is that in front of our friends, you present me in a positive light. And what I notice, and we were talking about candor earlier and its importance in leadership, I think in intimate relationships is just as important, because that little tiny thing, if you clear it right away, it is that. It's an opportunity for knowing each other and closeness. But if that little tiny thing somehow gets reinforced or gets bigger or grows legs and runs away, before you know it, there's a significant issue that in some ways has a very addressable root had you caught it early.
I think it's so true. I mean, you talk about radical generosity. The thought came to mind is sort of radical encouragement. I mean, again, as I mentioned, it's one of my highest values, but, you know, sort of encouragement begins at home. If you see, if rather than tell your friends, oh, you know, my husband, my wife, boy, I really like A or B, well, how about telling them,
Yes.
you know? And, you know, as you say, cut them some slack when they make mistakes. And, yeah, one of the things I think people are loath to do in our society is apologize. Because people think apologize is weakness or vulnerability, which I think is strength. It's okay. I mean, I have this attitude, which I don't always live. If there's a 50-50 chance I'm responsible, why not apologize? You know? I mean, I'm a person of faith, so it's like, I think God will cut me some slack if I apologize for something I wasn't guilty of. The universe won't hold it against me. I think it's okay, you know? Or on the side of, you know, I'm not saying you go overboard, apologize things you know is totally not your fault, but I don't know, there are certain principles to me that are really, you know, that whole radical generosity, encouragement, vulnerability, you know, being willing to listen and admit maybe that you were wrong. And I don't know, I feel like that doesn't always happen.
Yes.
And that's where the snowballs happened, you know.
I think that you're naming something so powerful, which is it is vulnerable. And I appreciate Brene Brown so much for helping translate vulnerability into an expression of courage, because certainly that's how I experience it. But there's a trust enhancement in a vulnerable act, which can be revealing if something hurt my feelings, even if, you know, my inner voice is saying some version of, you should be bigger than that, or you shouldn't let little things bother you. But just, it's vulnerable to say, gosh, that affected me. And it's also vulnerable to say, I'm sorry, and to own your part, and to recognize that sometimes intention and the experience that the other person has, they don't match. And to be able to clean that up, where you say, gosh, that wasn't my intention, and I'm so sorry that it landed that way.
So just talk about, as with the 80/80 book and all, and you had, you know, successful consulting, speaking. How has that whole, between 2007 and writing this book, how has that shifted maybe your paradigm or maybe career direction, or I don't know if it has? I have a feeling it's caused a shift, not just internally, but in terms of what you do and where you see yourself going.
Well, so especially sort of since writing or beginning this process of writing the book about 2 years ago, a lot has really shifted. So as I think about, you know, my work, the paradigm has become really different. That I would say I am certainly guilty for the first 13 years of my marriage, really thinking about me and what my career was going to be, and being supportive and really jazzed about the things that my husband was doing, but sort of saying, I have my things and you have your things, and not thinking about it in terms of how do we win together? And so being in the conversation just from a different perspective, where instead of saying, hey, it would be good for me to take on this client, or it would be good for my career to do this, you know, to do this keynote, really asking the question, what's in the best interest of us and our relationship and our family? And it's a little cheesy, but I'll tell you anyway. So we named our family unit. So the first two letters of each of our names. So it's Kajona, and for Kaley the Jory is, and so we will ask, well, is that in the best interest of Kajona? We've made really different choices based on, okay, what's in the best interest is for me to not travel that week, or what's in the best interest is for you to cut down to 50% time? What's in the best interest is for us to get outside help for that. But framing it differently has absolutely been a paradigm shift.
And it's interesting that we started talking about you worked a lot with leaders in professional contexts, and now you're spending time in personal relational contexts. None of us think twice about doing what you just said in professional context. Is this in the best interest of XYZ Corporation? Is this in best interest of my team? Why is it so hard or harder to do it in the context of relationships? I hear you say that about your family, about Kajona, and I think, wow, that's revolutionary. It's not revolutionary in business. Why is it revolutionary in personal relationships?
It's a great question, Gary. I think there's two sides to that. I think what you're describing happens in excellent organizations where that is explicit. Make the decision that's best for the organization and I will hear leaders say, make the decision that's in the best interest of the organization, not the decision that you think I'm going to like. And I think in a lot of organizations, there actually can be kind of a slipping back into, well, gosh, what will advance my career rather than what's in the best interest of the organization? What will make me look good versus how will this promote the product or the service or the company or whatever it is that we're up to. Answering your question, though, I think it's one of the great mysteries of life that many of the things that are natural in organizations, for instance, almost every organization I've worked with has a mission or a vision and a set of values. And yet many, many family units don't. At least they don't have it explicitly stated. I think some of it is recognizing that the lines are blurry. I think certainly now where home and work are as intermingled as they have ever been. But I think there's also a space where some people feel resistant to the idea of running their family like a business, that they're sort of like, I want work to be work and I want family to be family. And I respect that line. I think, however, bringing in some of the best tools from both sides is really valuable. Bring in that planning those values from the corporate into your family. Bring from your family that idea of radical generosity, which in a corporate setting is often phrased as assume positive intent.
I mean, you raise a really fascinating point that when in an corporate organizational setting, you think, what's in the best interest of the organization? Well, your family unit is an organization.
Yes.
So what's in the best interest of this family organization as a whole? Because we're a unit. Not about my interest or his interest or her interest. What's best for the team? And if you ask the right questions, if you're people of goodwill, you can probably come up with the right answer. Then you maybe go back to your values list. So if we have to choose between, my career, your career, or other organizations, which organization is the highest priority in our values list? It's probably your family organization is the most important, more important than other organizations or careers, and then that's a value judgment. I'm guessing it's probably the way yours is. So if that's true, then let's make sure we put the values of the family organization first. Let's talk about what that looks like. It's not about winners and losers. Let's collectively agree, and it's probably mission possible. It sounds like you can have a big war, but with the right questions and the right mindset, those things can get resolved. Does that make sense? I mean, people don't think that way, right?
I think that's right. And I think, maybe we'll mix in too many metaphors here, but I think about it also like sports teams, that if you're only thinking about your own stats, I recently watched The Last Dance, right? If Michael Jordan were thinking exclusively about his own stats, they would not have been world champions all those years. And you could see, if you watched that, there was a mindset shift where it went from, I'm going to score the most points, I'm going to have the most rebounds, I'm going to be the MVP, to we're going to win as a team and as a unit. And with that mindset shift, totally different things became possible.
And what you're saying is if you want to win in marriage or in life, don't think about your own stats.
Yes.
That's kind of what you're saying.
Win as a team.
So it seems like it's sort of so as one of the things you talk a lot about here in Crucible Leadership is we have a paradigm which we talk about that we're not against success, but what we say is, we want people to lead a life of significance, which means a life on purpose, dedicated to serving others. However, each individual, however they look at that paradigm. So, it's pretty clear to me as I see what you're doing, but talk about what a life of significance looks like now, given where you are now, and given what you're just doing with 80-80 marriage. I could guess, but rather than guess,
I would love to hear your guess. My greatest dream work is that this book, it would have an impact so that couples have additional tools to be able to win as a team. And that in my world, the more sort of teamwork, the more generosity, the more love that there is in the world, the better place it gets to be. And that if these tools can serve in that way, that feels to me like a very significant contribution.
Can you imagine? Please go ahead, Gary.
No, Warwick. Go ahead.
I was going to say, can you imagine a generation of kids growing up in families where their parents practice radical generosity, and that's modeled for them? So they, in their turn, with their partners, husbands, wives, that will cause a ripple-like revolution, a positive revolution of blessing, if you will.
That is a dream that I would love to see come to fruition.
That sound was the captain turning on the fasten seatbelt sign. We are going to be landing the plane soon. Before we do that, there's a couple things I want to do, and I know Warwick will want to ask you another question, I'm sure. But one thing, Kaley, first of all, how can listeners get a hold of you, find out about the book, find out more about you and the services you offer?
Absolutely. So the easiest place to find out about the book is 8080marriage.com.
And those are 8080, right?
8080marriage.com, exactly. And if you are an Instagram person, every day we put a tip or a challenge out on Instagram. So follow us there on Instagram. It's also 8080marriage, so 8080marriage. And then you can find out more just about me either on that site or at KaleyKlemp.com.
And those are both with K's, correct?
They are KaleyKlemp.
See, with a last name like Schneeberger, I'm always very, very focused on on the spelling of things. I want to ask you one last question before I let you go, and then Warwick will finish up. And that is, for people who are listening to this, our listeners who are hearing themselves in some of the Crucible-like experiences you're talking about, and they don't know where to begin. They don't know what to do. What's next? I've heard this makes sense, but now what? One of the things Warwick has talked about much on the show, of late in particular, is the power of one small step. You may not have to have the entire roadmap before you start moving toward a solution, moving beyond your crucible, but there is one small step. What, in your estimation, in your advice, in your wisdom, what's one small step listeners who find themselves maybe trying to live a 50-50 marriage and they want to get to an 80-80 marriage? What's one small step they can take?
Well, so I think there's an internal step and there's an external step. So the internal step is to change your self-talk from fairness to generosity. That any time that sort of moment of resentment arises, just to change it to say, and in this moment, what would radical generosity look like? That's an internal shift. If you want more externally, I would say absolutely a small step is read the book. Whether you implement it or not, it's a great place to start.
Bravo. The PR guy in me applauds that answer. Warwick, back to you.
Yeah, wow, that's awesome. So I think you've said before there's probably been a shift in really your passion. I think the whole 80-80 marriage and how to have more fulfilled marriages and relationships is probably your passion, I'm guessing. So we also talk quite a bit here about legacy. As you think of what you would like your legacy to be, how does 80-80 marriage and that whole thing play into what you would like to feel like you've left the world in terms of all this?
Gosh, it feels like such a big question. So
that's why it's the last one.
Right? Do I get to define my own legacy? For me, it's relationships across the board. So if the work that I do with leaders through, 15 commitments and conscious leadership and drama-free office creates healthier relationships for people as they spend so much of their time at work, and then those more connected, more generous relationships for people at home. If relationships are enhanced, gosh, it would be incredible if that were a piece of the legacy that I got to leave.
Well, that right there was the sound that I've been in the communications business long enough to know when the last word spoken, and that was it. Normally, I try to wrap up in some key takeaways, but here we talked about transparency on this episode, and I'm going to be transparent enough to say that I'm not nearly as good as Kaley, so I wrote notes, but I'm not going to say them. Listener, your key takeaways are to listen to the show again, because Kaley really unpacks things extraordinarily well. It's her area of expertise. And this isn't a 50-50 exchange where I'm anywhere near as good as she is in doing that. So please go back, check out her website, listen to this show, and dig into the insights that she offers, because the insights she offers can indeed help you through your crucibles. And speaking of crucibles, until the next time we are together to talk about crucible experiences, to offer, Warwick has said this, we operate in the realm of hope. That's what we do. We try to provide hope that you can move beyond your crucible. So until the next time we're together to talk about those things, please remember this about your crucible experience, whether it's professional or personal or a mixture of both. Right now, it seems extraordinarily painful, probably. It will not always feel that way if you learn the lessons that your crucible is trying to teach you. If you dig in, if you're transparent, if you're vulnerable, if you're authentic, and you see inside what the crucible is trying to teach you, then learn those lessons and apply them moving forward. Your crucible in that case will not be the end of your story. In fact, it will be the beginning of a better story, a new chapter in your story. And why it is a better story is because that chapter in that book leads to a different destination, and that destination is a life of significance.